Smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar Friends. That's the Labour former advisor Matthew Torbitt and the pollster Luke Tryl. We'll have that chat about flags, shall we? Maybe about asylum. We'll catch up with what's going on at the White House as we speak. All sorts of things. I want to hear what you are thinking. So send me a text or a tweet and we can chat after the news with Laura Cook.
Thank you. Good evening. 3 people have died and a 4th remains in hospital in a serious condition after a helicopter crash during a flying lesson on the Isle of Wight. Emergency services were called to the site near the Shanklin Road this morning. Joe Robertson is the MP for Isle of Wight East.
It's heartbreaking. What should have been a fun morning out on a helicopter flight on Bank Holiday Monday has turned to tragedy with the death of 3 people, and the 4th, of course, is seriously ill. It's heartbreaking, and I know the local community here on the island are in shock, frankly.
The Israeli military has dismissed claims it's trying to silence reporting in Gaza after a strike killed 5 journalists earlier.
The IDF does not intentionally target civilians. The IDF makes every effort to mitigate harm to civilians while ensuring the safety of our troops. Any incident that raises concern in this regard is addressed by the relevant mechanisms in the IDF.
That's Brigadier General Efi Defrin, who's been speaking after an attack on the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. 20 people died. The IDF claims Hamas is using the facility as a base. Sir Keir Starmer is under pressure to toughen his approach to the small boats crisis. It's as a YouGov poll for The Times finds 70% think he's mishandling asylum hotels, including over half of Labour voters. In a move aimed at addressing the problem, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has announced plans to speed up asylum appeals and deportations. However, Stephen Swinford, The Times' political editor, says Reform UK's announcement tomorrow will put added pressure on the government.
Tomorrow, you're going to have Nigel Farage standing up and doing this very big press conference where he is going to announce the most draconian migration policies and asylum policies that you can imagine. And he's got on the front of his bill the illegal migration, open brackets, mass deportation, close brackets bill. And that is how he's selling this, that he is going to deport hundreds of thousands of people using measures that even the Tories, I think, at the moment would struggle to compete with, and Labour certainly can't get anywhere near.
President Trump is meeting the South Korean president at the White House. Just hours before meeting Lee Jae-myung, who was elected in June, Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social platform there appeared to be a purge or revolution in South Korea. It's cast doubt on hopes for ironing out differences between the 2 countries on trade and security. The sole survivor of a poisoning that killed 3 people when they were served death cap mushrooms has said he bears no ill will towards the woman convicted of the murders. Erin Patterson, who was convicted last month of killing 3 relatives of her estranged husband, appeared before a Melbourne court as a judge prepared to sentence her. Among those who spoke at court about the impact of her murders was a sole survivor of the lunch, her husband's uncle Ian Wilkinson, whose wife Heather was one of the victims. And Newcastle manager Eddie Howe has told his players to harness the atmosphere of their Premier League showdown with Liverpool at St James's Park tonight. The build-up has been dominated by striker Alexander Isak wanting to leave Tyneside to join tonight's opponents. Howe says it adds extra spice to a highly anticipated occasion.
First home game, I think, is always going to be electric, under lights, evening game. Those games are always really special for us. I love experiencing those days, those nights with the energy that the crowd bring us.
And remember, our news podcasts are on the Times Radio app. Look for the Times News Briefing in the World in 10.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
It's really good to have you with us on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is the former Labour advisor Matthew Torbitt. Hi, Matthew.
Hello.
Good to see you. And the pollster from More in Common, regular visitor to this show, Luke Tryl. Good to see you, Luke.
Good evening.
And you can watch us on YouTube. We are live there for you now if you want to see us as well as listen in. And either way, do join in. Listen in and join in. Keen to have a chat. I'll ask you first then, Matt, what's your thought for the day?
Thought of the day, I was going to come in with something different earlier, and then I saw again the sort of, I don't know, it's depressing, dehumanising figures again coming out of the Middle East. And I thought it tied in nicely with, I was reading Matthew Parris's piece in the Times this morning about how there is no hope for Israel or Gaza whilst Benjamin Netanyahu is in charge. And I keep seeing these sort of pithy, in a way, vacuous statements from the Foreign Secretary and our government that it's almost like reminds me of a fella I used to laugh at down the pub who speaks with loads of words but doesn't really say anything. There's nothing behind it. There's no substance. And I think it's been a long time coming. I try not to wade into the Middle East. It's very, very complicated. But I think we have to start looking at sanctioning Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he's a man now who is just intent on staying in power. And his far-right coalition has got him tied up with, you've got to do this, you've got to now impinge on Gaza City, you've got to pretend we're going to go and get all these hostages. And this isn't, to let terrorists like Hamas off the hook, but I just think when there is a country that is an ally that is acting inappropriately, you have to act. And I think it's probably well past the point of us acting. Yeah. But I think better late than never. Yeah. And some of it can feel performative. Matthew Paris said, people say it's performative, and that if you can't do anything, then just shut up. I don't think it is about shutting up. I think you've got to actually maybe be louder.
Just help us more with this, because the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, and Britain is a signatory to the International Criminal Court. If he were to land in this country, which ain't going to happen anytime soon, he would be liable to arrest. So what sort of sanctions are you talking about?
I think you've got to look at freezing assets and stuff like that. I think it's getting to that point where you've got to let him know he can't just do things like this. There's now, reportedly, according to UN committees, a true famine going on. The problem is with man-made famines, once they're in, it's very hard to stop them. It isn't just a case of you start giving people food and whatnot. You have clusters of deaths in different parts. And I think we need to be doing better.
You mean sanctions on Israeli business deals, for example?
Yes, because the Israeli public already, you look at the families of hostages, they're protesting against a lot of this action because none of it is going to bring the hostages home. And I think all of us have to do more than just say, well, Hamas could end this by returning the hostages. That is not true, because we've had Minister Ben-Gvir and we've had Minister Smodic say actually the opposite, that if you do give the hostages back, that's not the end of this. We're going to absolutely, ethnically cleanse people. And actually, yes, Hamas, awful terrorists. I would not expect better from them. I expect better from sovereign states and from elected officials like Benjamin Netanyahu. I expect better. And I think, the fact that we sell arms licenses, and that you look at America, you think we fund these people if you're American, and yet this is what they're doing. I wouldn't want to be funding them anymore. I think it's atrocious. And Matthew Paris likened it, because I think he was born in South Africa, to things like apartheid, and people were a bit unsure at first about how to go about that. I think you've got to look at similar sort of things. It's just utterly depressing.
So what do you think about this, Luke? And also, we've discussed public opinion on the Palestinian territory, the Palestinians and Israel before. And British public opinion is divided on this on both sides, and some, as it were, undecided on what they think. Inevitably, that's going to be the case. But there is a lot of sympathy for the plight of Palestinians in British public opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I totally agree. The news today and what's happened at the hospital is horrific. And I think Israel is in danger of losing hearts and minds around the world. Actually, we know that at the start of this conflict, when you ask people who they had most sympathy with, you had a big group in the middle who said neither, and those who said they had sympathy for either side were broadly split. That has shifted over the course of the conflict, and those who have sympathy with Palestine now twice the number who say they have sympathy with Israel. Still a big group in the middle who say both or neither, but you can see the direction of travel. And look, British public are very clear. They overwhelmingly think Israel has a right to exist, but at the same time, ask them about Israel's response in this conflict, and they're more likely to say it's been disproportionate. And I think that is the thing there. Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm sure he doesn't care about his approval rating in the UK, but he is way underwater. I think the danger for Israel is that they are becoming, on the international stage, more and more seen as a country that is, worse than not acting in good faith. They're losing publics, and of course Israel needs to keep that public support, and none of that is to detract from the evils of Hamas and the atrocities which they perpetrated on October the 7th. But there's just a feeling amongst the British public that, what is happening in Gaza now isn't right. It isn't right that children are starving, and I think they want more action from our leaders to try and put that to an end.
Yeah, I mean, the question of proportionality, which is a requirement under international law when it comes to military action. And the question is, yet again, a glaring one when you look at the attack on the Nasser hospital with 20 people dead, 5 journalists dead, and there have been other attacks of that kind. I mean, how can that fit any definition of proportionality? But Luke, it is also reasonable to put the question to you, having made the point that you make. Hamas is not going to release all the hostages. I mean, the deal they're talking about just at the moment involves half of those who are still alive and still being held. Hamas, they want all the leverage they can get. I mean, what's to be done about that?
I think you have to look and unfortunately attempt to take their words, what they want, in potential good faith. They aren't going to give the hostages up. It's the only leverage they've got. What they want is a permanent end to hostilities. If that is the case, I think you have to look at doing that. That's not to say they've won. That is to say that tactically, I mean, regardless of what happens here, I think this is the end of Benjamin Netanyahu, purely because he's losing the support of Israeli people. The hostage families aren't happy about this. Since the blockade of aid, he has brought back 2 hostages, and one of them was basically a swap and a bit of a negotiation with the Americans. His military say tactically there is nothing to gain from this. It is clear what is happening, and all it seems to be is that he wants to persist to ensure he stays in office and doesn't have to face the hundreds of charges he's facing on corruption and fraud allegations. So I think you have to look at an end to this, and then whether you get people around the table or whatever else, I just think, as Luke said, I think there is a feeling that this isn't right. Purely
you can't get around the table with Hamas, can you? I mean, the view that Netanyahu is perpetuating the war for his own political ends is very widespread now. But still, the question of Hamas is there. It's a live one. It's a real question. And the Egyptians, and since then the Jordanians and the Qataris, have come up with some sort of argument for an interim authority to take over the management of Gaza on the road to something more stable down the road. But no one sees a role for Hamas.
There shouldn't be a role for Hamas. The thing there is a role for, actually, you've reminded me, is for the President of the United States. I believe he could end this in one phone call. I think the Iran missile incident shows that Netanyahu needs Trump. And if he was to begin to withhold aid, withhold support, withhold finances, there would be movement on this. And what we currently have is a bit of a dereliction of duty of the President of the United States, who sort of speaks in terms as if he's some sort of bystander, like, oh, it looks really bad, doesn't it? As if he's got no power whatsoever. I think he could aim to end this, and then you maybe move forward from there, whether it be hostages or otherwise. But I would agree, which you wouldn't normally hear me say, I suppose, with Matthew Paris, that there is no hope at all in the Middle East whilst Netanyahu is there.
All right, I'm going to move over to you, Luke, for your thought for the day.
Well, it seems like we're in the midst of quite a lively debate, you might say, about flags and flying them in this country. And I think, there's a legitimate debate to have about flags. Have we been too squeamish in the past? Are we not flying them in enough places? And you speak to the majority of Brits are proud when they see the Union Jack flying. The majority of English people are proud when they see the St. George's Cross flying. And, we should have that debate. But what has worried, in fact, more than I think worried me, what has, actually in some cases disgusted me over the weekend, is some of the images we are now seeing of people's private property being vandalised, with people, graffitiing the cross onto people's homes. And worse than that, instances that have been, you see on X of the most appalling racial abuse, Islamophobia that is emerging as well. And I fear that the elements of what you might call the online right are risking unleashing demons in our country that have no place, certainly have no truck with public opinion. People are proud of the flag. They have no time for vandalism, bigotry or hate. But I think that those who are advocating and legitimately advocating the case for greater flying of the flag also, I think, need to be as robust in calling out and condemning these instances of bigotry, these instances of abuse, because I think we're going to end up in a very dark place if we don't, and it's certainly, not the place where the British public are.
I can remember a conversation a good few years ago with Ken Clark over a glass of wine, over lunch, and we talked about extremism. I remember, and he made the point that he built a political career on the conviction that the British people recoil from extremism. He did not think it was in what he saw then as the British character. Is that still true?
I think it is true. And look, I speak to people around the country day in, day out, and the British public have a tendency to punish those who push the pendulum too far one way. And as I say, they basically want fair rules, and those fair rules to be fairly applied to people. That's what the average British person wants. They have no time for, as I say, vandalism, violence on whichever side it comes from. And I think
is that what you read into polling, which we discussed before this moment, and the latest polling, which puts immigration at the very top of the list of people's concerns? You put it in that category?
Well, say, look,
is that about fairness, not about anti-migrants, not about xenophobia?
It is absolutely about that. So if you look across here, YouGov, Ipsos, Migration Now, in the top issues there. In ours, it's second to the cost of living. But when you ask people why, it's about pressure on services. It's about, can we afford it? It's about the fact that channel crossings are breaking the rules. We don't know who is coming in. It is not because people don't have empathy with those who make the really difficult decision, or, very often are forced to leave their home country because of threats, because of violence. They still have that empathy. And whilst, I should say, the British people are, lots of people are very frustrated, and some people are angry about the failure to tackle crossings. What they don't condone is violence outside migrant hotels. They believe in people's right to protest. They believe that local people should be consulted on things like migrant
have you got numbers at the top of your head
so
on
it's
that?
around, so if you ask around violence, it's around 12% who say that it's justified, which is higher than I think you would like. Actually, it's up from about 8% last year, but the overwhelming majority of the public votes ask about protesting outside asylum hotels peacefully. That's around 50% there. So there's a big difference between peaceful protest and making sure local people can have their voices heard, and violence as well. And I think,
And what about those who disapprove of these protests? Is there a figure on that?
So, it's basically the other sort of, around 30-40% who say that this it's not insignificant. And I think, again, it comes back to that principle of fairness, of proportionality, of, basically, British people stand up for what's right. And I think, there are lots of people who are in danger of ending up far on the wrong side of that.
Okay, I want to talk more about this. It is such an interesting topic, but in the context of what's been going on just this afternoon in the White House. I'll explain in just a moment. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends. I'm John Pienaar, and this is Times Radio.
Hugo Rifkind, tomorrow morning from 10 on Times Radio.
Prepare for a lively mix of illuminating conversation.
Is it just me that strikes me there's a whiff of nonsense about the deal?
Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself.
Even while it drags on and as horrifying as it is, it should have been a foreign policy triumph.
Plus unique perspectives on the day's news.
There seems to be a theme here, and that is that no one knows what's going on.
Hugo Rifkind, tomorrow morning from 10 on Times Radio.
The road stretches before you, but there's trouble ahead. Stationary cars. You're faced with the McDonald's side mission. Do you, A, join the ever-growing queue, or B, take the next exit and treat yourself to a glorious Mackey's?
Detouring to McDonald's.
Start your side mission today.
Chase is the digital bank that puts you first.
What does that mean?
Well, most people don't bank 9 to 5. That's why Chase customer support is available 24/7.
So I can contact them whenever works best for me?
You've got it. You can chat to a real person through the app.
That's handy.
And you can always call up to speak with them directly.
Now we're talking.
Join the UK's #1 bank for customer satisfaction. Chase. See what your money can do. 18 plus UK residents. Eligibility applies. Claim based on YouGov UK Banks and Building Societies Rankings 2024. Verify at chase.co.uk/YouGov.
Visit Times Radio on YouTube for the latest videos and interviews. John Pienaar on Times Radio.
And the former Labour advisor, Matt Torbitt's here with me on Pienaar Friends, and so is Luke Tryl of More in Common, our regular in-house, well, almost in-house pollster. Good to have you both here. We were talking about patriotism. We were talking about flags, and President Trump was talking about that earlier on, sitting at that desk of his, signing executive orders. One of them was to mandate a full year in jail for protesters who burn American flags. He was talking about this earlier. Let's have a listen.
When you burn the American flag, it incites riots at levels that we've never seen before. People go crazy. In a way, both ways. There are some that are going crazy for doing it. There are others that are angry about them doing it. Do you want to discuss that?
Sure. So what the executive order does, sir, it charges your Department of Justice with investigating instances of flag burning, and then where there's evidence of criminal activity, where prosecution wouldn't fall afoul of the First Amendment, and instructs the Department of Justice to prosecute those who are engaged in these instances of flag burning.
And what the penalty is going to be, if you burn a flag, you get 1 year in jail.
So that's a taste of the argument that's been going on in Washington this afternoon. I'm going to go back to that after the news. But here, let's talk about a bit more about flags, Union flags, the St. George's flag. Matt, what are your thoughts on the flying of flags? Because the raising of the St. George's flag is now a lively debate all across the media. You've got one councillor, at least in London, who says they don't want to see it. They're saying it's not allowed. It's a risk to health and safety. Presumably, I think they argue that people climbing lampposts is not as safe as it might be. Where do you stand on that?
I think the councils are probably wise to have a blanket ban of any flags. I think purely because I seen one saying, was it a council in Birmingham saying, yeah, but they might damage the lampposts. We've got to be. I think this is just nonsense. Just say what you think. There's the risk of it maybe falling onto a car on a main road if there's an accident.
Yeah, the safety argument's a bit thin.
Yes.
What do you make about the real issue?
I've never been the most patriotic. I can't lie. And I think part of that is growing up in a generation where you just feel like, what's there to be proud of? It's awful. And I'll tell you, the time I remember going, do you know what, I feel proud to be English, and really bursting with pride, was the England football team under Gareth Southgate. And it made me recall how sport is a great leveller, how you can get behind some decent young lads who've come from all different backgrounds, different hardships, and things like that. I've always been more proud of where I'm from in a community sense. I'm proud to be from Stockport. I'm proud to be from Manchester. I got very teary yesterday watching there's a new documentary series about the disappearance of Shannon Matthews, and being a bit young at that time, I don't remember, but how the whole estate of where she was from came together, and it reminded me of the solidarity you get on a lot of social housing estates up and down this country and from where I'm from. The flying of the flag, I have no real issue with it. I suppose it comes with context. Now, I lived in Tower Hamlets for 5 years, and I know the mayor there has been very vocal about how he doesn't want it. There's going to be certain generations in Tower Hamlets that are going to see that flag, and it's going to remind them of the National Front in the 80s. What is the purpose of you putting that flag up? I saw a load of them on the motorway over the bank holiday weekend, and I just sort of thought, well, it doesn't make me more proud. I just go, oh, right, yes, it's shrug. And I think most ordinary people, not politically engaged, might watch the news, but they've got more pressing issues like putting food on the table. They don't want this. They don't want it, not because they're not proud to be British or proud to be English. They just don't really care for it. And I think the criminal damage aspect that Luke spoke of, I think, will really start to rankle with people, and that's where the sort of more online right will begin to lose people. And I think the polling sounds about right, because I think we've got to definitely be careful in sort of our industry of politics and the media to not equate the loudest voices with what is popular. I think you just have a lot of angry, loud voices that want to make a political point and maybe in a way incite a moral panic that we're not allowed to fly the flag, everyone's against us, Labour are putting, immigrants first and whatever else, which just, it's just not the case. It really isn't the case. But there is a perception, which I think Luke was also right on, of fairness, and I think Nigel Farage has tapped into the fairness thing very well. People I know back home have said the same thing. There is a perception that people are coming across on small boats and they're jumping the queue ahead of you. It reminds me of the sort of late 90s, early noughties with Blair and sort of opening the floodgates to EU migrants, and people going, well, they're getting this and they're getting that. And there's this idea that they're taking all the jobs, but also all the benefits, and none of the arguments quite make sense. but I feel like fairness is an inherently British trait, and that's why it rankles with people. I don't think
to argue against fairness, but the argument which you hear now repeated by some protesters really quite loudly, that migrants, asylum seekers crossing the channel pose a threat to women and children in this country. I mean, I don't know how widely that view is shared. It does, when you put it like that, it just seems like an awful slur on an awful lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think, rhetoric has consequences, and, that is the sort of thing which can incite violence. Now, in places like Epping, there have been allegations made. I think there's a police investigation. Someone has been charged. It is right that is looked at. It's of course right that safety concerns are addressed, but there is. I think a danger that we head into the stage of saying everyone coming over is a potential criminal. Look, the problem with small boats and channel crossings for many people is we do not have control. We do not know who is coming over. But, the British public don't think that everyone coming over is, coming over to break the law, coming over to be a threat to people. But that said, there is no doubt that for some, that risk element is cutting through. So when you ask the public overall why those who oppose housing asylum seekers in temporary accommodation like hotels in their area, the top reasons, as I say, are pressure on services, the cost. If you just look at parents, however, the top reason there is concerns about sexual assault and sexual violence. There is no doubt that these cases are cutting through
in a big way, a very big way
to some people as well. And I think it is. I think in all of these situations, the most important disinfectant is the truth, right? You need to, I actually think the authorities getting on the front foot and saying, look, these are the actual statistics. I think the mistake when it came to something like the grooming gangs was the authorities being seen to cover up there and not admit the truth and not point to perhaps problems within particular communities in particular areas. The truth is the best disinfectant here. And I think the danger of not putting out that information is that then stuff does fester, right? And then people start to think, every asylum hotel is a risk to people in the neighbourhood. And, quite clearly that isn't the case.
Now, tomorrow we're going to go in more detail, as you would expect, into Nigel Farage's a big set piece appearance when he's going to be talking about asylum and Reform UK's thoughts on asylum. We'll be looking at that. We'll be looking at the policies. We're going to be testing the policies. We'll be doing all that we can on that story to just look at it up and weigh it up objectively. But on the numbers that you see all the time, these hotels and the protests and all of the blanket coverage surrounding it, is that making a measurable difference to Reform's standing? Is it helping them significantly?
Well, look, if you ask people why are they voting for Reform, the top reason by far is because of immigration, but to such a degree that you don't see with any other party on any other policy issue. So
and the hotels thing, is that giving them a particular boost?
It does, because hotels, for lots of people, we find this particularly in focus groups, are a visible sign of failings on things like stopping crossings, but also there's something there when we talk to people, and we heard this actually when we spoke to residents in Epping, this sense that local people are being ignored and national government does just what it wants by putting hotels in places, ignoring local concerns. So I think there's a dual effect there. As we've discussed before, there's an increasing number of people voting for Reform, largely because they think the other two big parties have failed and they want to roll the dice on something new. But immigration still the biggest driver for Reform UK.
Matt?
Doesn't surprise me. I mean, Nigel Farage, I think, to borrow another pollster, sorry, Luke, of YouGov, they found him to be the most popular party leader. The problem is his favourability rating is minus 29.
Well,
so that tells you
compared to Keir Starmer, he's, 12 points behind Luke?
Yeah,
directly.
In the head-to-head, Keir Starmer under YouGov. In ours, he's about 3. It's between 2 or 3 between the two of them.
So I think it's not a surprise, but also people hate politicians at this current moment in time, and we're going to elect the sort of least unpopular one as it stands. I think lots of the parents thing is very interesting. Reminds me of how we ended up with sort of public lynchings in America all them years ago, because you had the release of A Birth of a Nation in America, where this, sort of black man rapes the innocent white woman, and all of a sudden there was propaganda everywhere, and that it was fear of the other. And you find it in these areas. I think even of UKIP's rise in 2015, the highest vote share for a lot of UKIP's performance in 2015 was in some of the most whitest areas. So I think that's where a lot of this sexual fear comes from. And I think, if there's a lot of bad faith actors banding bad stats around. I think we want to talk about, men with medieval attitudes, I heard someone say this morning. I think the rise of Andrew Tate shows that it is misogyny, femicide and other things is totally not an anti-Western position either. I think the performance he puts on and the idea of a trad wife and all this sort of stuff, we've got our own issues. And I think even the stats, again, 90% of people in prison in this country today for rape are British born. So that if you really care about violence against women and girls, you care across the board. Reminds me very much of the Equal Marriage Act and people that would hide their bigotry behind their religion and say, oh no, it's a Christian thing, or it's this. What it was, you were using that as a cloak for your own bigotry, and you have people doing that now, hiding their racism behind quote-unquote rational fears or whatever.
I'm going to take a break here. I need to take a break here. Guys, it is time for the news. Kate Borsa is going to be getting us up to speed on her show right after this one at 7 o'clock. And we're going to cross to stateside and find out a bit more about what's been going on at the White House. It's still going on in the White House. When Donald Trump starts, he seems never to want to stop. Now, though, it is 6:31, so let's get the news with Laura Cook.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you. Good evening. 3 people have died and a 4th person is in a serious condition after a helicopter crash on the Isle of Wight. The chopper came down during a flying lesson near the Shanklin area this morning. Witnesses say they saw it spiralling out of control before it went out of sight and crashed into a hedge. Dan Subani, the operator of Sandown Airport, says it's been a terrible day for the aviation community.
These aircraft go away. Sometimes they are in the garage for 2 months. Every nut and bolt gets checked. They mitigate the risk extremely well. That's what makes it so devastating when these things happen.
The Foreign Secretary has called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza after an Israeli strike on a hospital killed 20 people. David Lammy says he's horrified by the attack at the Nasser hospital, in which 5 journalists also died. Amanda Nasser is a nurse who's been working at the facility in Khan Yunis.
I do know one of the journalists very well, Miriam. She was dear to me, and I actually just saw her yesterday with another journalist. I got word that she was killed, and it broke me down.
Israel says it's investigating and regrets any harm to uninvolved individuals. A rise in violent crimes and sex offences against women and girls on trains has been described by rail bosses as an epidemic. The number of violent crimes rose by 5% in the year to March 31st, while the number of sexual offences increased by 10%, is according to figures from the British Transport Police. The data shows most sexual offences take place during the evening rush hour period, between 5 and 7 in the evening on busy carriages. The Home Office has confirmed 212 migrants arrived on small boats yesterday as protests outside asylum hotels continue over the bank holiday. A poll of voters suggests the Prime Minister has lost grip on the issue. And ahead of a meeting with the South Korean President, Donald Trump has questioned the political stability of his guest country. Trump wrote on Truth Social that it seems like a purge or revolution. We can't have that and all do business there. Lee Jae-myung is currently in the Oval Office for talks. Remember our news podcast on the Times Radio app. Look for the Times News Briefing and the World in 10.
This is Times Radio.
When you're growing a small business, you need someone who understands the ins and outs. And whether you're a tailor or an accountant, you need the tools to succeed. With an HSBC Small Business Banking account, you'll have free accounting tools and access to our business specialists, virtually or in person. Because whatever your small business looks like, we're with you all the way. Search HSBC Small Business Banking Account to get started. Subject to application, eligibility, credit check and T's and C's. Visit hsbc.co.uk for details.
As a small business owner, you've got to be ready for the ups and the downs. Ready to think on your feet, ready to be rushed off your feet, ready to make the big decisions and make the tea. 2 sugars in mine? Ta. Ready to be there for your customers whenever they need you. Well, ditto. Virgin Media Broadband's ready for anything business can throw at it. Yeah, it's business ready broadband. Search Virgin Media Business Broadband.
Listen to Times Radio at 6:30 every weekday morning for your indispensable briefing on the latest politics, business and sports news of the day. Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app and on your smart speaker, John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Luke Tryl for more comments here with me on Pienaar and Friends, as is Matt Torbitt, the former Labour advisor, and here's Kate Borsay, who takes over at 7 o'clock. Hello, Kate.
Hiya, John. I know you've been doing some great work on covering the deaths of 5 journalists and others, of course, at the Al Nasser Hospital in Gaza. And we'll be speaking to a nurse based at the hospital too, just to continue that conversation, to try and get the context of it. An area of the 4th floor struck, and then as people, and this is where some of the journalists come into play, were trying to launch their own rescue effort in that area of the hospital, along comes another strike, which sounds very hard to justify, doesn't it? We'll be speaking to the former IDF spokesperson, Colonel Jonathan Conricus, as well tonight, to kind of put some of this to him. And I know the IDF has launched their own investigation into it. But I think it's worth noting that something like 88% of these inquiries and investigations by Israel are unresolved or just left. So we'll be talking to him about that, about how we get some answers and how important those answers are. But I suppose the wider question is this an appropriate method of attack? Why would you go in on a hospital in the same area twice? So we'll be covering that on the show, John. We'll also speak to the Labour MP, Anna Dixon, who's spoken out today about the amount of abuse that she's been getting online via social media, some of which she thinks is caused by some of her counterparts, some of her Conservative counterparts, the worst level of abuse, she says, experienced since Brexit. And we can tag immigration onto this as well. We know that there are lots of very critical voices out there in terms of Labour's approach to immigration, whether this sort of piecemeal style of sort of trying to tap away at it bit by bit, whether it's making appeals a much swifter system, or whatever else it is that Labour says it's doing to try and get a grip on levels of illegal migration. The public clearly aren't happy. The polling, according to the Times today, voters clearly aren't happy as well. And that is spilling out into abuse aimed at MPs. We'll speak to her about that. And then just picking up on a couple of the other stories around today, John, the Conservative plan to enforce fines for playing loud music on buses and trains. This one intrigued me because, of course, it is already an offence, isn't it, to play loud music? And so what are the Conservatives up to here? Are they sort of reinventing the wheel with this one? Well, they want to see on-the-spot fines issued. By who, though, would be the question, because I think probably all of us in this room and anyone else who uses transport knows that there's generally a staff of one aboard a train, and you don't often see that member of personnel on a tube. It's completely impractical unless the British Transport Police arrive on it to issue on-the-spot fines. So is this another example of the Tories trying to come down on something which sounds good? I mean, everyone gets annoyed, bit like Fair Dodgers and Robert Jenrick's efforts there. Everyone gets annoyed by loud music on trains, but would this hit the mark or not? What annoys you most on public transport, John? Do you have a series of bugbears when you're taking the train in every day?
Do you know what? I'm unbelievably chilled and switched off on a train. I quite like train journeys, and I really, really like long train journeys. It is just a chance, a rare opportunity, if you want, to switch off and just put your brain into a lower gear and look out of the window. I mean,
you must get annoyed then if someone starts. I mean, for me, it isn't.
I'll be
music.
lucky enough. I mean, if
it's
someone
like
was,
YouTube videos, or like some extreme preacher sort of belting out at the top of his
to be
voice.
honest, I mean, I haven't had that experience. Fortunately, it would annoy the hell out of me if I'm sitting there happily meditating, and there's some sort of tinny music coming out of someone's phone. Then that's pretty annoying. I mean, most people actually listen on headphones, don't they, or earbuds? I certainly do.
I think we've seen a reversal. This was a big thing when I was a teenager. You used to have people blaring it out of their phones before iPhones was a thing. And I don't know if it was AirPods and headphones became fashionable. People started listening on headphones. And then I have noticed a slow revert back to like people just doing what they want. So
just
I don't know if
just leaving it going.
Yeah, I will add though, my biggest one, and I will say blokes because it is always blokes.
Yeah.
wearing their rucksacks on the tube when they're stood up. Take it off, put it by the side, let other people on the tube.
Before you start bouncing everyone around off them.
So annoying, so annoying.
We've got to ask you now, Luke.
Well, I've actually got numbers on the train.
Oh,
In fact,
God.
Yes, please.
We asked just the other week, and we found 93% of people said it's not okay to play loud music on a train. Only 7% said it was okay. But there was a bit of an age difference.
Who are those 7%?
Well, so it turns out they're in Gen Z. So in
Yes.
Gen Z, 13% think it's okay. Whereas if you look at over 75s, 100%, it actually rounded to 0, said it was okay. And I've never seen that.
If I was an over 75, I'd just whack on some Beethoven or some really Wagner, something really loud.
Right.
And play that
What about
instead.
eating? Does eating on a train bother you?
It doesn't bother me, but some people are really detested by it because of the level of germs. I mean, if you look at the average tube seat has something like a lot of urine and feces on it, doesn't it?
What's that got to do with eating?
Well, because you're sitting down on a seat, you're putting your hands on the seat, you're putting your bum on the seat, and then you're picking up a sandwich with the same hands and eating it, John.
Oh. I mean, I'm an eater when normally if in a rush.
I'm an eater and a drinker.
I think it's okay if it's a can of gin and tonic, John.
Yeah, and a packet of Quaver.
Oh God, yeah, you're not allowed on the tube. Remember, Diane Abbott with the M&S gin and tonic. No, I'll eat on the tube, but will feel rude doing so, even though it doesn't bother me. It almost feels like a bit of an unspoken
Well, you know it's rude when you do it
social
anyway.
etiquette. Well, if you're hungry and you're in a rush, John, what do you do? Starve.
It's actually better to eat on the tube than it is walking down the street, right? Probably.
Well, the TfL, I remember a few years ago, actually had a bit of a campaign saying I won't eat food or smelly food on the tube. I remember the posters.
Well, I get the train home at 10:15 every night, and on a Thursday or a Wednesday, if it's been a bit of a boozy night in town, often people will walk on with their fast food or maybe a stinky curry or something, and that is a bit much because you're just like, oh.
And it's great that we got Luke here because he can now tell us what the opinion polling says about people sitting on a train drinking a tin of gin and tonic and eating a packet of discos. What is the general opinion about that? Where does Britain stand?
I haven't asked that one specifically.
Although next time.
Yes.
Although the one thing we did find that there was a really big age split on was the slightly different topic of whether it's okay to skip a round of drinks in the pub. And
what do you mean by skip? You mean dodge?
Dodge your round. So Gen Z, 60% thought it was okay to skip your round. Again, you get to the older generations and it's only 15%. So we may become a nation of...
How can that be okay? How can it be okay to just piggyback on everybody else's wallet?
I think it's just the loose morals of Gen Z. We're right back to this,
I
aren't
used
we?
to think the kids were all right. That's terrible news. I mean,
What's wrong with Gen Z? If someone's just dodging drinks all night, isn't someone going to say something?
It's very poor form. I mean, I've been sober for 3 years, and even my mates will go, no, you don't need to get involved. I do. I'm out with you.
Do you get a round of alcohol? So
I think it's just right. It's fair. I might not be involved, but I'm going to go up and get a non-alcoholic drink anyway. So.
Okay, but you would get a round of alcoholic drinks for your friends,
Yeah.
even though your drink costs £2.50 and their drink costs £7.50.
Well, you say that.
Yeah, because they're going to buy
non-alcoholic
you a
beers-
lemonade or whatever.
No. So if I'm out in the pub to feel involved, I'll have a non-alcoholic beer. Well, they're costing you £6 these days in London anyway, so it's not that too dissimilar.
Yeah.
So I think they go, but you're not drinking. Yeah, but it's the same price anyway. I don't mind getting involved.
Yeah.
I have to have a word with my sister who's Gen Z and double check she's not skipping rounds. That's dreadful behaviour.
Yeah.
I suspect that Gen Z come in for an awful lot of criticism on this kind of thing, don't they?
I'm from the generation where journalists used to drink, at lunchtime, and it was a thing. Trust me. If you were sitting in a group and not buying your round and conspicuously
but it's someone
not
else picking
failing.
up that tab, John, isn't it? That's not the journalist.
It's got nothing to do with it. It's about buying your round, and someone who would not buy their round in that group. The stigma is directly comparable to being an international terrorist.
I was just about to say, I won't expect you to name them. I bet you can still remember the people that didn't.
The persistent offenders.
I can, and we're talking over decades here, and they still occupy a position of detestation in my memory.
Are they still working journalists?
Probably not. We've all moved around a bit since then, and they're probably all dead. But you don't forget.
Secret to a long life, John. Make sure you pay for your round.
Yes.
All right, looking forward to your show. 7:00 with Kate Borsay. More coming up here on Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio at 6:44.
Wake up to Britain's brightest business bulletins with Times Radio business correspondent Dominic O'Connell.
For the latest business news and what it means for your money, join me, Dominic O'Connell, throughout breakfast every morning from 6.
Get expert insight and analysis in one essential breakfast briefing. Business Bulletins with Times Radio business correspondent Dominic O'Connell on Times Radio. It's the business.
Get the day's politics, business and sport every weekday in breakfast from 6:30 a.m.
Chase is the digital bank that could boost your savings.
Ooh, tell me more.
When you join Chase, you could earn 4.75% AER variable. That includes a 2.25% AER fixed boost for 12 months on top of our standard saver rate.
For a whole year, nice.
Yep, our savings boost could help you reach your goals, like that countryside getaway with the family. Get our best easy access saver offer today. Search Chase Boosted Saver. Offer may be withdrawn at any time. 18 plus UK residents available to new current account customers for your first 31 days. Eligibility applies. 4.65% gross. Terms apply.
I believe those who are curious see the world differently. At Viking, we have always been curious and quite a bit different. For over 25 years, we have been connecting the thinking person with the world. First on the great rivers, then on all 5 oceans, now on all 7 continents. We are one Viking, exploring the world in comfort.
John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Matt Torbitt, former Labour advisor, and Luke Tryl, the pollster. And we are joined very happily by Sarah Baxter, the director of the Murray Colvin Centre for International Reporting, on the line. I assume, Sarah, from Washington, from New York City.
That's right, from New York.
Right, lovely to have you here. So look, I'm guessing you were keeping an eye on all that business in the White House today. It was wall-to-wall Trump today, wasn't it? First when he was signing executive orders, later on sitting alongside the president of South Korea. But, you know, whichever one it was, he had plenty to say. I want to ask you, first of all, a couple of things we could to chat about. But the president talking about this relatively new initiative of sending National Guard troops onto the streets. It's happened in Washington, D.C. President Trump claiming all sorts of triumphs from that decision, that in so many ways extraordinary decision. The troops now having been sent to Washington D.C., the capital of the United States, have been authorised by the Pentagon, his friend and appointee Pete Hegseth, to start carrying firearms. Have a listen.
Washington was the most dangerous place in this country, and now, you know what? It's probably the safest place in our country. Everyone's starting to come here. Everybody before me is happy what I'm doing. Most of you won't say that because you're radical left. The newspapers are so dishonest. The press is totally dishonest, but that's all right. We've gotten used to it. The D.C. National Guard is unbelievable. We're also getting tremendous help from Secret Service. And we are at a point where Washington is booming again. People are pouring in.
So the president, he really does love abusing journalists, American journalists, to their faces, unless they happen to be in the MAGA corner, in which case he's very, very friendly towards them, at least most of the time. But Sarah, that idea that sending the National Guard into D.C. has turned it from the least safe city in America to the safest is obviously laughable, laughably false. I don't think there are any figures to support anything remotely resembling that. But more widely, Sarah, what's your take on the way that's playing out and how it's going down there?
Well, it's a tale of two cities in Washington, D.C. And by the way, Trump talked about sending more people as well, of course, to Chicago soon, and said he'd clean up Chicago in a week. So this is part of a rollout across various U.S. cities. But so if you're on Trump's side, then one of his chief aides, Stephen Miller, claimed rather ludicrously today that people have started to wear their watches and jewelry again in Washington just because the National Guard is there. Again, without any evidence, of course, to support this. Maybe
it's obviously absurd, isn't it? It's clearly absurd.
Yeah, it's crazy. And yet, on the other side, you now hear of school children in certain districts of DC who are afraid to go to school because, and whose parents are afraid to take them because some areas are coming under, the presence of ICE and, deportation orders. And they're afraid they'll get picked up, American citizens or not. So the atmosphere is somewhat tense. I don't believe for a minute that people are pouring into DC now, tourists, because it's so quiet. And I'll tell you why. I bumped into a nice couple on the streets of New York recently who asked me just a few days ago. They said, we're going to Washington, but we're really scared to go because of all the presence of troops on the street.
Lord.
I mean, that's just anecdotal. But I said, look, don't worry. You're not going to be a target. You'll be fine.
And being America, Sarah, there must
People
be...
are worried to come to America at the moment.
I think the figures of visits to America by tourists is down 12% over the course of the last year. People just disapproving of so much of what America now is under the administration. But there must be Americans who like this stuff, who approve of it. As everything in America, there's a polarizing effect. I mean, how much support is there?
Yeah, well, at least 50% of the country approve, i.e. the 50% who voted for Trump. And the truth is, there are a lot of figures being bandied around by all sides. So, of course, in Washington, people who oppose this say, but Washington's safer than it's been for years. But what they don't say is there was a huge spike in crime during the pandemic, in fact, in most major cities, and that these figures have come down as life has returned more or less to normal. So a lot of cities are enjoying drops in crime, but it doesn't mean to say they're absolutely safe, far from it.
Right. What is in your judgment, what is the actual point here? What is the political point here of militarizing the capital, of talking about militarizing Chicago, having taken steps in that direction in California, where, of course, he hates the governor of California, doesn't like California much at all. What does he want to achieve here? Unless it is as simple as wanting to affect the crime figures and take lots of credit for it. But you imagine there's always an agenda beneath that.
I think there is an agenda beneath that, John, but I'm going to sound like some sort of loony conspiracy theorist if I mention it. But the truth is that Americans are getting accustomed to seeing troops on the streets now. And particularly in the big cities, which are democratic strongholds, Trump has explicitly promised to send troops to New York as well. And the more used Americans get to seeing masked men of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, or the National Guard patrolling their streets, and the more that Trump uses emergency measures to put the military on the streets, and the more that the Defense Department, which apparently he now wants to call the Department of War, that's something coming out of the White House today, the more that the Pentagon is taking measures on America's streets and swapping personnel at the top of the defense agencies and intelligence agencies and the FBI, etc., the more the conditions are in place, and this sounds crazily alarmist, but for Trump not necessarily to leave power in 2028.
Well, Sarah, I mean, I do not think of you as a crazy conspiracy theorist. And what you just said is deeply, deeply chilling, even as a thought, as an idea from a credible journalist and analyst.
I'm not saying it's going to happen.
No, I hear that.
I'm just saying, why are we getting so accustomed to emergency powers and troops on the streets?
Luke.
It's a man who tried to resist.
Yes, Luke.
And failed. Yeah.
Well, look, there is no doubt that city crime has been one of Trump's sort of strong points. His first inauguration speech, American Carnage, there were sort of hints of it then. You did see in the last election swings towards the Republicans in places like New York and New Jersey, and in the midterms before that. And I think crime, if you look at some of the exit polling, was part of that. So there's no doubt that, inner city crime concerns. People, of course, were having a similar debate about London and whether crime is better or worse. And I think, as you were just touching on there, the reality is much more complicated. Some types of violent crime have gone down, and that's very good. Other types of crime, what you might call crimes of disorder, things like shoplifting, certainly in London, and crimes against people, maybe they're rising. So it's a bit of a mix, and it's the crimes which people come into contact with, I think, which are rising in cities, not just in the US. But sending troops in, it was interesting. I was looking at some polling of people who live in Washington, D.C., and they were overwhelmingly opposed to the idea of, obviously everyone wants crime to be tackled, but the idea of sending in troops, and, I think...
It is a very, very blue city.
It is a very blue city, and, similar reactions with the ICE raids in L.A., as well. And so, this doesn't command the support of people living in those cities. What the end game is here, I think it is difficult to see, but the fact that there are now reasonable people speculating that this is part of...
it was such a thing to hear, Sarah. Your idea there, and you're not saying it's a prediction, you're saying it's a fear, a suspicion bordering on a fear. The idea that this is a conscious step towards a militarized police state autocracy is what you're saying there. Is that, how far has that entered the bloodstream of political discussion in the media and elsewhere?
Well, I think it is beginning to enter the discussion, mainly because Donald Trump tried and failed to stay in power when he lost the last election. And even today, at his, in his sort of stream of consciousness press conference at the White House, where he was discussing a million topics an hour, he referred once again to the rigged election. And he's absolutely bent on rewriting the history of the 2020 election when he was defeated and Joe Biden came to power. And I don't think will ever accept that he's defeated again. So, he's also making moves to restrict mail-in voting and things that he thinks will help the Republicans at the next election. Now, it may be he doesn't want to stand again. It may be he wants to depart the stage quietly in 2028. He's getting older. He's 79 already. People have drawn a lot of attention to the blotches on his hands and his cankles, and implying that he's trying to cover them up now by covering his hands and sitting behind the Resolute desk to cover his ankles and things like that. For very good reasons, he may not want to run again. But if he does, or he feels convinced that whoever is the Republican candidate to succeed him, that person ought to win, he's the last person to start to go gracefully. We know that already. Right. I mean, it does kind of get us into another constitutional argument about tilting the odds, put it that way, in elections, when you've got this argument about redistricting. You have the state of Texas with its Texan Republican governor and with a Republican majority in the Senate. I mean, the Republicans in Texas pretty much run the show, but now we've got this move, very much encouraged by Trump, isn't it, Sarah, to change the House of Representatives district boundaries to the effect of adding effectively another 5 seats to the GOP, to the Republican tally. And in California, you've got Gavin Newsom, who is taking on or arguing with Donald Trump very much in his own terms, mocking him every day online in Trumpian terms. He's talking about doing the same thing in California. This is gathering pace, isn't it, Sarah? Yes, I mean, definitely redistrict. I mean, the maps of America are already heavily gerrymandered in Republican and in Democratic states. And they've both been at this game for too long. The Democrats have been claiming they want to clean it up and have stopped it in some states now. But what Texas is doing is, just to grab even more of a share of a huge red state to themselves. California, as you say, Gavin Newsom's fighting back. So he's doing very Trumpy things. He tells us we should call him Gavin Christopher, which is his middle name, Columbus Newsom, because of the maps, ! Because in Trumpy, all capitals fashion on social media, he's presenting himself as the hero that can stop all this, or at least do tit for tat. Yeah, and I think one of those appearances today, Donald Trump was talking about suing the state of California or suing the government. I mean, obviously, President Trump will reach for the litigant playbook any and every chance that he gets. But it's an extraordinary spectacle, isn't it, Matt?
It is, and I'd be interested to see what Sarah thinks about Gavin Newsom's tactics. I know he's had a little bit of criticism from certain Democrat circles that this may be turning off swing voters. I think they've got it all wrong. This isn't about swing voters. It's about sort of an attention economy when it comes to the media and Donald Trump's sort of Steve Bannon strategy of everything everywhere all at once. What do you make of it, Sarah? Is it getting a lot of cut through in a sort of positive way?
Honestly, it is. I mean, initially, I was rather disapproving. I felt that imitation was the sincerest form of flattery. I thought, oh God, no. But it's actually working. And now I'm laughing at some of these tweets.
You've either got to, if you don't cry, you've got to laugh.
Can't help sucked into the drama, whether it's Trump, Newsom. As I think you made a really interesting point about the attention economy, and it's all about getting people to listen. And at the moment, Newsom's getting some traction.
Yeah, that is what politics has come down to. Sarah Baxter, lovely to talk to you. Well, Emily Lee here was our producer, and Robin Warren on the keyboards. Kate's up next. I'm back tomorrow, and this is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thank you, John. This is Kate Borsay. It is the evening edition on Times Radio. Coming up, at least 20 people, including 5 journalists, are reported to have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a hospital in the southern Gaza Strip. We'll speak to an emergency nurse practitioner who was working at the Nasser hospital when the strike happened. Plus, we'll be joined by a Labour MP who's received death threats as tensions continue to grow over the government